welcome to VCLS webinar. We're excited to have you with us today. I'm Zhen Xi, a marketing director at VCLS. I'll be your moderator for this session, and thank you very much for joining us today. As many of you know, bringing a new therapeutic product to the market, whether in the US or in the EU, is really an increasingly complex endeavor. So there is no development programs look alike, and each one requires thoughtful alignment between scientific milestones and the regulatory opportunities. So today, our expert Laurie and Magda will guide us through the practical strategies for engaging regulatory agencies early, as well as navigating expedited pathways that can meaningfully shorten your development timelines. So please welcome first Magda, Director of Regulatory Science at VCLS. She is specialized in regulatory strategy for oncology, infectious disease, and rare conditions, advising on development plans and submissions. Magda represents our sponsors in FDA and EMA engagements and drives early regulatory involvement for expedited pathways. And also, please welcome Laurie, Director of Regulatory Science at VCLS as well. She has extensive experience in regulatory strategy for innovative drugs and biotech, leading global development and expedited programs applications. She has managed key FDA and EMA interactions, including Type B, Type C meetings, and scientific advice. So we will have approximately 40 minutes to 45 minutes presentations and 15-20 minutes Q&A sessions. So please feel free to use the question box to submit your questions. We will answer your questions at the end of the session. And as usual, the replay of the webinar will be available on our website after this live session, probably towards the end of the week. And we will also be running a few poll questions throughout the webinar, so we can get a better sense of your perspective and experience. So we encourage you to participate in these poll questions. With that, let's get started. As we begin, here is a quick overview of what we will be exploring today. We will start by discussing why early regulatory engagement is so crucial, moving into how and when to approach agencies in both in the States and in EU, and then look at the different ranges of expedited pathways available in both markets. We will then end with the key takeaway messages and time for us to answer the questions we will receive during the session. So this agenda really reflects what many of sponsors struggle with, identifying the right moment and the right mechanism to seek regulatory advice. Throughout the session, Laurie and Magda will share examples, insights, drawn directly from their experience while they talking to different agencies in their daily life. Now I will hand over to Magda.
All right, thank you, Zhen. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining, and we hope that you will hear something new and exciting in this webinar and hopefully learn something from it. So just starting from the next slide. This really is a very high-level view of the drug development journey. Most of you on this call already know this, but just to set the stage, of course, you start with preclinical development, where you're getting your foundational data, understanding mechanism of action, and assessing safety in non-human models. Moving on to early-stage clinical development, typically your phase 1 and phase 2 trials, where the focus is, safety, also dosing, and your initial signals of efficacy, where we're trying to answer the question, really, does your drug work in humans? Moving on to late-stage clinical development, usually phase 3, your pivotal trials, your large-scale trials, which are designed to confirm the efficacy and safety across, larger, more diverse populations. And these studies, of course, form the backbone of your regulatory submissions. Once we have that data, you go into registration, where you prepare and submit the dossier to regulatory authorities for approval, and then hopefully, get that approval and launch the product into the market. And also the journey doesn't end there. You have commercialization and post-launch activities, including pharmacovigilance, lifecycle management, real-world evidence, all activities that are critical to ensure ongoing safety and value for patients. So this, obviously, we all know it's a long and a complex process, and each stage builds on the previous one to bring safe and effective treatments to patients. So in the next slide, we're really just showing you 3 key principles for successful pharmaceutical development. Most of these are obvious, but it's good to sometimes hear them out. You need to understand your end goal and your product specific requirements. It sounds very obvious, but it's so easy for us to get lost in our day-to-day and in the details that you don't have that big picture view. But if you are clear on what success looks like for your product, everything else, will fall into place. The second and most important really is to lean on science and experience. At the end of the day, the regulators are, respond best to a strong scientific rationale. If your dossier, if your submission is backed by solid data, you're in, of course, a much stronger position. And very importantly, the last one, which really is the focus of our talk today, is to never underestimate the power of relationships and good communication with the regulatory agencies. You need to engage with them often, you need to engage with them early, and you need to build that trust so then you can reduce your timelines, and that's really huge, of course, for getting your products to patients faster. Just a note here to emphasize that no 2 development programs are alike, and you need to figure out what works best for you. So I'll hand over to Lori now to talk about the importance of an early regulatory strategy.
Thank you, Manta, and hi, everyone. So what does it mean to implement an early regulatory strategy? What are some of the key actions to achieve it? So first, you need to understand the regulatory environment. Leveraging the EMA and FDA expedited pathway and agency meeting mechanism will really help you navigate more effectively within the regulatory landscape, and in fine, bringing innovative therapy to patients more swiftly. One major key strategic and planning tool that you probably all know is the target product profile, TPP. We really encourage to initiate one at the early stage of development and to maintain it up to date. It has to be a live document. And so with a well-designed TPP and knowledge of the regulatory landscape, you will be able to identify and position key regulatory milestones in your development plan. And the use of the TPP will also help you implementing an integrated strategy. It's crucial to avoid silo and promote really coordination between clinical, non-clinical, and CMC. Your development plan should be one story. On the next slide, the benefits of having an effective early regulatory strategy. We have highlighted 4 here on the screen. First, it will allow you to secure key milestones. At the early stage, we often think about first-in-human entry as a key milestone. So by discussing ahead of your clinical trial application, your non-clinical and CMC package with regulator, it would allow you to validate, for example, the proposed animal models, selected dose, and therefore clear the path to an IND or CTA. Discussing early with authority, but also using appropriately the relevant expedited pathway will help building an optimized development plan and to generate supporting data for registration and patient access. It will also increase chance of registration success, hopefully, but not only by receiving feedback from the FDA and EMA, I would say, but also by having the opportunity to educate the agency on the development program ahead of registration. And it's even more important for rare disease or therapeutic area with no recent drug development. And then one important point to highlight, of course, is the financial impact. An optimized development plan means reduction in development cost, and each regulatory milestone creates value for external stakeholders. These milestones are really expected by investors, for example. Next slide.
Okay, now I think Laurie and Mamta set the context around why early engagement with regulators is important. We are shifting into how and when to engage with the regulatory agencies. Timing is really important, the most important factor for successful regulatory strategy. But before we go deeper, let's get a moment to understand where this audience stands. I will launch a poll questions and please really participate. Let me launch it. I hope everyone can see it on the screen. When do you typically initiate formal interactions with regulatory agencies? So your response will give us a snapshot of how early engagement is being prioritized in practice. I will leave a few seconds for the audience to answer, then share the result with you. Okay. So a lot of you, the majority of you, try to start this important initiative at the preclinical stage. So if you tend to engage early around preclinical or early phase 1, you are likely experience the benefits of risk reduction and clear development pathways. So if you wait until later phases, that may reflect internal resource, data readiness, or strategic considerations. So either way, understanding these patterns will help us to frame today's discussion more concretely. Now I leave the floor to Mamta and Laurie, who will elaborate a little bit more on this important topic. Okay, I hope you can see the next slide.
Yeah, you can see it. We can actually go to the next one.
Okay.
So we're going to start talking about all the different ways that companies and sponsors have to be able to talk to the regulators. There are numerous meeting opportunities that we've tried, just give you sort of a very high level view on this slide, showing the US possibilities on the top and then the EU at the bottom. So in the middle, you see sort of the typical drug development pathway from preclinical all the way to launch and life cycle. And then we've highlighted the usual types of meetings that you can have with the regulators, starting all the way on the left on the US side with the interact, the pre-IND meetings, end of phases, and then your pre-marketing authorization meetings. And we'll be talking a little bit in detail about all of these. We've also highlighted some meetings that are in red on top of the US and at the bottom for the EU, which are outside your typical meeting formats that sponsors usually think of when they want to meet with the regulators. And we will be talking about some of them a little bit in detail as well. So going to the next slide, this is just a very, very compact view of each of the different meeting formats that you can have with the FDA. So starting on the top, the interact meeting, which is it stands for initial targeted engagement for regulatory advice. This kind of meeting used to be offered just by the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, the CBER, but now it's also offered by CDER. So this is a really early meeting with the regulators. It is a non-binding informal meeting with the FDA, and it's meant for companies that are having regulatory challenges that are sort of unique and novel and are really during the really early stages of product development. So for example, if you have a question around very early product characterization or preclinical proof of concept studies, You have new delivery device, which is unprecedented. It's nothing like that is out in the market, or to identify, critical issues in development of innovative products. So this is a way to interact with the division, which is not intended to take the place of a pre-IND meeting. So this is in addition to your, regularly scheduled pre-IND meeting that you can have. And is not prerequisite to request for a pre-IND meeting as well. So some sponsors may choose to have an interact way before they are ready to have a pre-IND meeting. But it is important to note, and from our experience, we can share that interact meetings are hard to get. They are not always granted. The criteria for being granted an interact is pretty strict. And so if you do end up applying for an interact meeting, we've seen the division come back and say that your briefing book or your meeting request is more suitable for either a different type of FDA meeting, either a type C meeting, or just go for a pre-IND meeting if they believe you're further down the development pathway. So it's good to have that interaction with the FDA, and then they can come back and let you know if a different meeting format is more applicable to your program. So moving down the list, you have your type A meetings, and we've shown the timelines associated with all of these meetings. The type A, of course, is the shortest timeline, but these are those critical path meetings, usually used for programs that are stalled. Either could be a safety concern or a commercial or a CMC concern, but these are really immediate, urgent kind of meetings that you have with the FDA. The type B meetings, the 60-day procedure, is really the most common sort of meeting that most clients will apply for before they submit their IND, which is the pre-IND meeting. And then, of course, there are other meetings like the pre-NDA or the pre-BLA meeting you have before your marketing application. And the purpose of this meeting is really to de-risk either your IND or your marketing application. And the goal here is to ensure that you are ready to submit your IND or your NDA or BLA, and get really the maximum benefit with your interaction with the FDA, and to identify any potential issues with the development program, especially at the pre-IND stage, so that then your IND does not get put on hold. Important to note here is that every program is assigned only one pre-IND meeting. So you have to use it carefully. You have to make sure that it is the right time and you have all the questions that you would like feedback on to de-risk your upcoming IND at that point. So you have to really time your pre-IND meeting well. Going down the list, the type C meeting, which is the longest procedure, but this is really the catch-all kind of bucket of meetings. If there is a meeting that is outside the scope of all other meetings on this slide, it's probably going to be a type C meeting. And companies can and will have multiple type C meetings during their development process. And then lastly is the type D meeting, which is a relatively new meeting that's been offered by the FDA. And this is for sponsors that are seeking really quick, rapid input on a very narrow, focused regulatory questions. So this is typically focused to 2 topics and should not require input from more than 3 disciplines or divisions at the FDA. And these are intended for really questions that do not require extensive FDA review, and you can get written responses within 50 days. So we've seen a lot of our clients as well, a lot of companies that are now opting for the type D meeting when they want that quick feedback on a narrow set of questions from the FDA. All right, so moving on to the next slide. Here we are really talking about other meetings, specialized FDA meetings that we really don't get to hear about as often as the ones that were described above. And we realize that many of these meetings are not early interactions with the FDA, but they are most of them are really key meetings that sponsors can leverage to make sure that their development pathway is going in the right direction. So just going through this list very quickly, first is the surrogate endpoint meeting, and I'm not going to talk about it here because we have a separate slide for it after this one. we have the clinical outcome assessment meeting. So in recent times, we've seen that the FDA has been really heavily focused on patient-reported outcomes, or PROs, in clinical studies, has been giving a lot of importance to those PROs. And this type of a COA meeting is meant to be used for questions around the use of PROs or other similar outcomes to ensure that the CROs are fit for purpose for your regulatory decisions. Then we have the complex innovative trial design. And as you can tell from the name, it's usually for trials that use very complex designs, some of them like adaptive designs, Bayesian approaches, other innovative technologies, usually used for late stage trials, but the goal is really to gain FDA feedback on those novel trial designs earlier than later, so that then your development is not stalled. There's also a model-informed drug development meeting. This really is all around the use of modeling and simulation to inform dose selection or your trial design, and to get that alignment with the FDA about integrating all your quantitative methods into your development strategy. The rare disease endpoint advancement meeting, we'll talk about it also a little bit in detail in a couple of slides. And then, of course, the combination product meeting. This is really important for companies that have combination products that are not very simple. They are a little bit complicated. It's to align really the regulatory strategy of your drug device or biologic device combinations, and to clarify the requirements around all the divisions, CDER, CBER, and CDRH. This could be products like injectable devices or inhalers or digital-enabled drug delivery systems. And we've had a lot of companies or clients that are confused about really what their combination, what a division of FDA their combination would lie under, and who would be the lead, which division would be the lead. So it's really important to get that alignment early, so that then which parts of the FDA will be reviewing most of your submission dossiers. And then last but not least is the digital health technology meeting. Of course, in our highly digital world, focus of this meeting is compliance with the ever evolving FDA standards for data integrity and validation. This could be for products like wearables and sensors and digital biomarkers in clinical trials. And so really to get that clarification and early alignment with the FDA is very important, and this meeting could help with that. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to focus a little bit on the surrogate endpoint meeting, because it really is an important meeting that we've had companies and clients talk to us about, and it's been really helpful when held with the FDA. And the focus of this meeting is to discuss the use of surrogate endpoints, as it says so in the name of the meeting. And the goal is to determine the acceptability and the validation of the proposed surrogate markers. So this is a meeting where you want to get that early stage alignment about your biomarker, whether the biomarker can be used to predict clinical benefit with your preliminary clinical evidence. And the end goal, of course, is to establish a pathway towards potential accelerated approval. So sponsors should look for this meeting early, once you have that preliminary clinical data, and you are convinced that your preliminary clinical data shows that the surrogate endpoint is showing some clinical benefit. So this is critical when, like I said, when you're aiming for accelerated approval of your product. And in recent times, there has been, a lot of regulatory pressure around the transparency and mostly the post-approval commitments for these kind of for accelerated approval and those kind of approvals. And so such a meeting can help to get that early clarification about what thresholds are needed and what the client needs to have in terms of their surrogate markers to show to the regulators. This is, a typical type C meeting in terms of timelines, and is used really vastly for oncology and for rare diseases, and also for conditions that have limited clinical endpoints. So it's a really important meeting that sponsors should keep in mind. And then moving on to the next one that we wanted to highlight, which is the Rare Disease Endpoint Advancement Meeting. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but then going to the next slide about that meeting. Now, this is another FDA initiative to support the development and acceptance of novel endpoints, but primarily for rare disease drug development. So this is in cases where your traditional measures may not be feasible. Rare diseases have small patient populations, limited clinical data. And so because you cannot use traditional endpoints, you want to, accelerate your valid endpoints for these rare conditions. And so this is a chance to talk to the regulators really early and discuss your innovative endpoint concepts, their justification, and the strategies that you are going to use to justify these endpoints. This is really helpful, of course, for pivotal trials, so that you can know the regulatory expectations, of course, leading up to accelerated approval, and you're not wasting time at the back end. It is important to note, of course, that these meetings will not guarantee your endpoint acceptance, but of course, they give you that opportunity to talk to the regulators, to reduce that uncertainty, and help streamline your development. And the next slide, we just wanted to share some really sort of fresh news, hot off the press. I think we've all been in a situation where we've had a meeting with the FDA, we get the meeting minutes, and then we read something there only to wish that we had, one way or one quick clarification with the FDA. And we've had our sponsors come to us many, many times and say, okay, can we just send a quick email? Can we just ask for a quick clarification? And now there is actually a formal process that's been piloted to be able to help sponsors with just that. So this pilot program was initiated last month, where sponsors can submit one clarification question per your formal meeting. You submit the question via email, and then the agency aims to respond within 3 business days. So this is really a great initiative from the FDA to improve that post-meeting communication, which I think has been very critical for many sponsors. And to increase that transparency. We've had follow-up opportunities before, but not with fixed timelines and really not knowing when the FDA would respond back. But this hopefully will significantly accelerate that process. So definitely we're going to keep an eye on this, and this is an exciting improvement in this process. All right, so now I'll hand over to Laurie to discuss the early interactions on the EU side.
Thank you, Manta. So yes, let's now explore the different options to interact with the regulator in Europe at early stage. There is, of course, a standard scientific advice meeting, either at national level or EMA level, and we are often asked which one should be selected at early stage. And there is no really standard answer here. It really depends on the objective of the meeting and the question you have on your development strategy. And what I want to highlight is that there is, different way to interact as well, like informal interaction to consider. So, for example, if you are a registered SME company, the SME office can be contacted for questions about regulation, administrative question, or if you are lost, and help you to navigate the range of procedure and incentive. At national level, still under this informal interaction, there is some country that have a pre-advised meeting, quite informal, like in Germany, and that will provide general or regulatory guidance to applicants. At the EMA level, there is the EMA Innovation Task Force that offers a meeting, but I will come back to this one in the next slide. There is as well pilot program, regularly launched, to improve the collaboration between regulators and developers. So there is a simultaneous national scientific advice. So that's for applicants that want to seek national advice from more than one competent authority at the same time. And following a positive evaluation last January, the continuation of this pilot has been validated, and it's kind of well established. But there is 2 other ones from the ACT EU initiative. So ACT EU stands for Accelerating Clinical Trial in Europe. and they have developed last year 2 pilots to improve the quality of clinical application in Europe. And I will give more detail on those pilots in a few minutes. For the medicine repurposing pilot that was initiated back in 2021 with a focus on rare disease and pediatric population, unfortunately, it ended last year. And one last format I would like to highlight is the emergency task force within the EMA, and we will discuss it in the coming slide. So on the next slide, let's first take a look at the ITF meeting. So it's a great opportunity to engage early in the development. It's earlier than what would be expected for a scientific advice, for example, so before entering clinical stage. And you can get, let's say, preliminary scientific and regulatory consideration on the information presented. It's open to all kinds of applicants, so SME or not. It's free of charge, good to know, and you can apply by contacting the ITF with a form associated, and the eligibility would be confirmed within 2 to 3 weeks. And so some of the scope that the ITF can cover include like your non-clinical development plan or discussion on clinical endpoints or prime eligibility, for example. So next slide, going back to the listing of early interaction, I mentioned pilot program. And 2 of them have been launched by the ITU initiative and are still running this year and hopefully next year as well. So the objective of this pilot is really to improve the quality of clinical trial application and in fine to foster high quality research in Europe. So the pre-CTA pilot should be considered if you plan to submit a CTA and need technical or regulatory assistance from one national country before your application for clinical trial is submitted to the CTIS for assessment. And it's coordinated by the Clinical Trial Coordination Group, so with representatives from national agency. And the aim of this pilot and with this meeting is really to facilitate the discussion between the different national competent authorities. And you would get a final advice letter issued from the member states involved. In terms of eligibility criteria, you can ask up to 5 questions, and you need a mature protocol. So you cannot go too early until you have this mature protocol with you. So now looking at the scientific advice working group, clinical trial coordination group pilot, it's a long name. So it's different from the previous one because here you can get guidance on scientific aspects of the clinical trial. And because it is coordinated by both national authority via this coordination group that I mentioned and the EMA via the scientific advice working group, so this advice will allow you to de-risk acceptability of the CTA, but also relevance of the data you aim to collect for future registration. So to apply, obviously, you need to have a trial that would involve more than 2 countries. And, you know, a justification on why the request should be selected for this pilot is expected. Can be based on the medical needs, complexity of the design or application, but that is expected in the request. And then next slide, I would like to hand the description with one very specific interaction option related to a therapeutic target. It's proposed by the emergency task force within the EMA. You may know that the ETF took over activity from the COVID-19 EMA pandemic task force. So the ETF, focus on medicine that could address declare or potential public health emergency. But it's important to note that antimicrobial resistance was added last March as a priority area. And very recently, last month actually, a new approach, again, aiming at improving scientific advice for this medicine was published. So similarly to the pilot that I just presented, the scientific advice working group CG pilots. So applicants here can be granted a combined scientific advice, but not only with the EMA and National Competent Authority, but also with a new ethic expert group, advisory group that was created. And here again, the objective is to help accelerate clinical trial authorization across Europe. And we are looking to get more insight once this is well established, as this is really a new format for this meeting. Okay, so at this stage, you might be a bit confused by all the different options and which one to select. The ACT EU has mapped information on their website, to help you applicants navigate within the different options. You can find it online, but I would say that really the key decision criteria is the objective of the interaction. What do you expect from regulator? What are the key questions you need to discuss? If it's purely technical, if it requires scientific guidance, if the scope is CTA, or the overall development plan. And those criteria will define your eligibility to one procedure or the other. So we have described with Manta the FDA meeting and then EU, but I will now let Manta discuss the parallel advice procedure in place between the FDA and EMA.
Yeah, thanks, Laurie. So of course now, because Laurie and I are both here from the opposite sides of the spectrum, we have to talk about how the FDA and the EMA are working together to help sponsors. So there is a collaborative initiative called the FDA EMA Parallel Scientific Advice, or PSA program. And this is designed to provide simultaneous scientific advice to sponsors during the development of programs. And the main purpose is really to facilitate that early dialogue between both the regulators as well as the sponsors, so that then you can align on the regulatory requirements in both the US and the EU, so that you're not duplicating your efforts and you can accelerate your drug development. And the key feature really is this parallel advice, where both the agencies review the same set of questions at the same time. They may hold a teleconference with the sponsor for clarification or for questions, but it's important to note that the advice is independent. So each agency provides its own written advice. There is no joint opinion that is issued. And you can see that the benefits of a program like this would be to promote that convergence of regulatory expectations and consistency, and like I said, to reduce duplication and help sponsor design studies that meet requirements in both the regions. And these are typically used, of course, for complex products, innovative approaches. But unfortunately, there has been limited uptake of this program. In the 5 years leading up to 2021, the agencies only received a total of 37 applications and accepted 70% of these. And I think some of the reasons for this limited uptake could be that the process is a little bit resource intensive, it's complex, and the general awareness of this program is pretty low. Its perceived value remains a little bit low. There are also no sort of formal incentives or expedited pathways that the sponsors are offered. Some companies also think of confidentiality and strategic concerns. And there's a lot of work that's required to sort of harmonize your briefing packages to coordinate between the two agencies. So unfortunately, it's not a very popular advice program, but we're hoping that to get that harmonization between the two agencies, more companies can avail of this this opportunity. And so really just on the next slide, final tips about agency interactions. We've just talked about all of these, and they should be pretty clear by now. Of course, to start off with planning, plan the format, plan the right type of meeting that's applicable to your program. Of course, anticipate the timelines with the meeting, because all different meetings have similar but different timelines, so you need to address that in your development pathway. You need to know exactly when to go. You don't want to go too early. Like I said, for the example of the pre-IND meeting, you do not want to use up your pre-IND meeting if you don't have all the questions that you are asking to de-risk your IND and get that feedback in time for the IND. coordinate internally. This obviously is a no-brainer. You know, the team, the development program is one story. You've got to work across all your different teams and be able to coordinate internally all the different disciplines that will then feed into an interaction with a regulatory agency, and take advantage of well, agency fee reductions. This is really here as a nice little segue into our next section, which goes into expedited designations. So we go into the next slide, where we're going to talk about expedited designations both on the US as well as the EU side. And the next slide is really...
Thank you, Mamta. Sorry that I stop you here because before we go into the expedited pathways, yeah, I would like to launch another poll questions to the audience.
Yes.
And to understand that what kind of challenges that they encountered during this period. Okay.
Of course.
So let me get this. The second, sorry. The second poll question. Hope you can see the question and options. What are your biggest challenges in leveraging expedited programs? Okay. I will share the results with the audience here. I would say that if you select eligibility criteria or timing, I guarantee you that you are not alone. Many companies, they find it very difficult to gauge whether their preliminary data are compelling enough or not. Others may struggle with balancing EU-US expectations. As we continue through this session, we will keep these challenges in mind, and Mamta Lori will really touch on strategies that can directly address them. And I also would like to let the audience to give them time to ask questions. Feel free to write your questions on the panel, and Mamta and Lori will be able to answer these questions at the end of the session. And I try to keep the timing, leave at least 10 minutes for the Q&A, and talk about the expedited pathways in the next 10 minutes, if possible. Okay.
And for the slide with the overview of the expedited programs, if any of you have ever done any research into expedited pathways, I'm sure you've seen either this slide or some version of it with an overview of all the programs that are offered by the FDA, going from left to right: fast track designation, breakthrough therapy designation, regenerative medicine advanced therapy designation, or RMAT, priority review, and accelerated approval. So for the purpose of today, we're just going to touch on the first three because they are a little bit earlier in development as compared to the last two. So going to the next slide, talking about the fast track designation. Now this can be asked for or requested for a drug that treats a serious or a life-threatening condition, and it should show the potential to fill an unmet medical need. So the important thing to note about a fast track is that you can request for a fast track designation really early, even as early as your initial IND application, if you have non-clinical data to show evidence that there's potential efficacy and safety of your drug to address the serious condition. These data could include your pharmacology or proof of concept studies, or efficacy signals in non-clinical efficacy studies. There are a lot of benefits that come with the fast track, more frequent interactions with the FDA, be it meetings or written communications. Of course, your rolling review, where you can, sponsors can submit portions of the marketing application as they're completed rather than waiting for the entire application, and also eligibility for priority review, which would then shorten your time to approval. Going to the next slide for breakthrough designation. Now this is intended for expedition of development of drugs for, again, serious or life-threatening conditions, but you need to have that preliminary clinical data that indicates that your drug can offer a substantial improvement over therapies that are already existing based on clinically significant endpoints. And this designation provides all the fast track benefits, plus you have intensive FDA guidance and organizational commitment involving senior managers, and of course your eligibility for rolling review and priority review. So the goal really is to accelerate availability of those transformative treatments for patients for diseases with high unmet medical need. However, it's important to know that getting a breakthrough is not easy. There's about a 70% rejection rate for applicants of breakthrough. And what we want to highlight here is an interesting initiative by the FDA, which is the preliminary breakthrough therapy designation request advice, which is really when you're requesting from the FDA, submitting your preliminary data and to figure out whether you are ready to submit a breakthrough application or not. So this is a non-binding 15-minute call with the division. They will provide their feedback based on your current data, whether you are ready to apply for a breakthrough or not. And this has really been, in our experience, very helpful for many companies because you really get that first-hand feedback from the division telling you what additional data you would need, how much more of that data you would need. And if they think that you're not ready for breakthrough, we've had cases where they've told sponsors, okay, you're not ready for a breakthrough, but you can go and submit an application for fast track and you will surely get it. So it's a very easy conversation with the division, and you come back learning a lot from them. And the last one here is the RMAT designation on the next slide, which is also to accelerate development of your regenerative medicine products. So this includes cell therapies, gene therapies, therapeutic tissue engineering products, human cell and tissue products. And then, once again, like the breakthrough, you need to have that preliminary clinical evidence, but you don't need to show a substantial improvement over available therapies. You just need to show the potential to address an unmet medical need. And the data, of course, must come from patients with the serious condition. But for this designation, the FDA also accepts data from early phase single arm studies, provided that it suggests the potential to meet that unmet need, and the benefits are very similar to breakthrough therapy designation. We want to quickly highlight two other programs that maybe are not talked about as often. One is the START program. Now, this is a pilot program that was started in 2023, and it's designed for development of cell and gene therapies for rare diseases. So you get early scientific advice from the FDA to address all kinds of questions, all kinds of regulatory hurdles. You get frequent milestone-driven FDA engagement, and this could include emails, teleconferences, or office hour meetings, if you will. And so far, through mid-2024, 7 companies have been enrolled under the rare disease cell and gene therapy program. So definitely one to keep in mind if you are developing a drug in that field. And the last one, which really has been in the news quite a bit in the recent past, is your Commissioner's National Priority Voucher. This was released very recently in June of this year. And this offers companies a really expedited review, 30 to 60 days review of your application. There are very specific stated priorities, which are listed here, the 5 priorities. Of course, the proposals are not required to address all of them, but I think the more comprehensive your plan, the likely that you will be selected. This could be for novel medicines for obesity, PTSD, or other chronic diseases. And as of yet, 2 cohorts of vouchers have been awarded. But like I said, it's been a lot in the news recently because a lot of senior FDA officials do not agree with the way that the program has been implemented, and the firms that receive these vouchers have been selected. So this is something definitely that we're going to keep an eye on. But we want our other companies and clients to be well aware of it. And I'll quickly hand over to Laurie for her slides now.
Thank you. I will try to make it quick. So next slide. So in Europe, we do have one key expedited pathway considered as almost similar to the US breakthrough therapy designation that Manta has presented. So it's a PRIME program. So it's focused on medicine here again that address an unmet medical need and have the potential to bring major therapeutic advantage to patients. As you can see on the graph, the success rate is around 26%, with majority of designation so far granted in oncology. On the next slide, so can Prime be beneficial to your development plan? Major benefits, let's say, include the early appointment of your future EMA rapporteur and the opportunity to have a kickoff meeting with the agency to receive guidance on the overall development plan, and you will agree on the planning for future scientific advice. So it takes place usually 3 to 4 months after the designation is granted. But something to keep in mind is that Prime does not mean that continuous or informal regulatory exchanges with the agency. Unfortunately, the way to interact, on the scientific contents of your development will remain standard scientific advice procedure. Under certain criteria, you may benefit for what we call expedited written advice. And also, the kickoff meeting will not be a substitute of scientific advice. So you would discuss the overall development program, but if a deeper scientific discussion should occur, the EMA will ask you to come back and plan for scientific advice. So it's something to consider in your roadmap in terms of timing. As I said, to be eligible to Prime, you will need to justify the unmet medical needs, provide evidence that the product has a potential to address it, and to justify such potential, data must show meaningful improvement on clinical outcome. On the next slide, I wanted to focus on the early entry Prime designed for SME or applicants from academic sector. So it's an opportunity to apply earlier to Prime and have access to this program within Prime, so-called early entry, and you will benefit to some, not all, Prime feature. So you will get EMA product team assigned, and that will help you generate the data required to transition to a full Prime. And you will get not a kickoff, but an introductory meeting, again, to discuss the strategy of your development plan. And then you would have access to EMA scientific advice for free. But even if it's early application, you would still need to have proof of principle from non-clinical data and first-in-human results on tolerability and exposure. And if you're unsure, there is the opportunity to discuss your eligibility under a pre-submission meeting. So now we are now running a bit late, so I will let Manta give you a few take-home messages.
Yeah, thank you, Laurie. I think hopefully these are all obvious after the meeting today. Some take-home messages. Of course, plan ahead and engage early with regulatory agencies. They are there to help you in your development program. You want to talk to them as early and as often as possible to get their feedback throughout your development process. We talked a lot about expedited programs. Integrate those expedited programs into your product development. There are many programs that are offered both on the US and the EU side. Stay on top of what is being released, what new programs are being offered by the FDA or the EMA, and then integrate them into your roadmap. US versus EU, maybe it shouldn't be a versus, maybe it should be a US and the EU, but definitely have a global strategy where you can, start looking at engaging with regulators across the board and also using those designations offered by both the agencies. And like I said, for pilot programs, stay on top of what is being released, at least on the FDA side. There are a lot of new initiatives that are being offered by the FDA. Things are always changing. It's always a moving target. So stay on top of what is coming out of the agencies and integrate them into your development plan as much as possible.
Great. Thank you, Mamta, Laurie. I see that you get very passionate when we talk about all these topics. As we arrive at our final slide, we really think about what matters most as you refine or redesign your regulatory strategy. The landscape continues to evolve, like Mamta said, particularly with new pilot programs. So shifting agencies, expectations, and opportunities for earlier and more interactive engagement. So to close our session today, I would like to ask the audience one last question. which area is your top priority to optimize timelines and reduce risk? So this question will help us to understand where organizations, companies believe they can make the greatest impact, whether you choose early engagement, expedited pathways, or global alignment, capability building, or partnership. So each one really reflects a strategic level that can fundamentally reshape the development timelines. I'll share the results with the audience. Great. For those who prioritize global alignment or expedited pathways, it often reflects increasing competitive pressure and the needs to ensure data packages safety, multiple regulatory simultaneously, I think. But I see the majority of the audience choose early regulatory engagement strategy. This is exactly what we talk about today. Now let's take a look at the questions we received during the live session. I will read it out and pass it to Mamta or Laurie, depending on the topics. Let's see. Our first question is about really the early scientific advice in Europe. At an early stage, is it better to seek national scientific advice or go directly to the EMA? Laurie, maybe you will be the best person to start with.
So as I said, it's really a key question that a lot of applicants are facing. And again, there is no standard approach. The key decision criteria is the objective of your meeting and the intending question you may have. But it's true that we often recommend starting with national advice because you will initiate the dialogue with the agency that will, for example, review your CT application. So you want to start the dialogue with this agency. It can be as well a bit more informal than the EMA scientific advice. And I would say that, yeah, when you start discussing a specific topic with the EMA, some national agency will not accept to comment after on that specific topic. So it could be a good strategy to start at national level, but again, it will depend on your specific development plan.
Thank you, Laurie. The next question we have is, do you need to get orphan drug designation, ODD, before being able to request RDEA meeting? Maybe for you, Mamta?
Yeah, no, there is no connection between the ODD and the RDEA meeting. Of course, they're both for those rare diseases, those orphan indications. But they are completely separate processes, and you do not need to have an orphan drug designation to be able to request for a rare disease endpoint meeting. So they are completely different. The incentives that you get from both of those are different, and there's no direct correlation between them.
Thank you, Mamta. And the next one is about PRIME. We also, so if a program has already entered phase 3, is it still possible to apply for PRIME? For you, Laurie?
So PRIME, yeah, thank you. So PRIME is not initially designed to support advanced development stage. For sure, it won't be the right program if you have entered the pre-submission phase of your MA. And why? It's because PRIME is really here to support applicants during the development program and help building an optimized development plan and generation of robust data that will support the future MA. So I would say, you know, if your pivotal study is ongoing and no further study are planned, there is very limited room for the EMA to advise you. And looking at the success rate, you know, PRIME, yeah, it's probably not the best program to look for in a very late stage.
Okay, thank you. There is a question about RMAT. What if we are an ATMP, I guess it's CGT in the States, but not regenerative? And the CGT, if we have a CGT for a rare disease, which is not cancer, is that okay to apply RMAT? I think that's the question.
Well, I think the question about being an ATMP but not being regenerative, I mean, there's a strict criteria for the drugs that can submit for RMAT, and the R in the RMAT stands for regenerative, and there is that criteria that's in the FDA guidance. And so if you do not fall under that characterization, then I think it would be hard for you to apply for an RMAT, and you would probably not be eligible, but we would have to look into those criteria and then your product individually.
All right, thank you, Mamta. Let's take one more question before we close the session. It's related to FDA EMA parallel scientific advice. The FDA EMA parallel scientific advice program, is this similar to Project Orbis?
No, so it's similar in the way that, of course, they want regulatory convergence, but they're very different because they happen really at two different ends of your drug development. The PSA, the scientific advice, is what you want to get from the regulators early. You want to get that alignment on your development pathway. Project Orbis really is focused when you're ready for your marketing application, so that the regulatory agencies can review and approve your application simultaneously. So instead of applying for your MAA and your NDA or BLA separately, you do it under the jurisdiction of Project Orbis at the same time with both the regulatory agencies. So one is really PSA is early stage, and Project Orbis is late stage.
Great. Thank you, Mamta and Laurie, for those detailed explanations. And I would also like to thank the audience for the thoughtful questions. And thank you very much for joining us today and for your active participation. We will share the webinar replay in 1 or 2 days, and it will be available on our website. Again, I hope this session is useful for everyone, and we'll keep in touch and hopefully see you in our upcoming events, online or in person. Have a nice day or the rest of the day. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.